The blood-stained shirt was the first thing Maverick Hollowell noticed when the boy stumbled into his ranch office at dawn, clutching the lead rope of Storm Chaser, the stallion worth more than most people's houses. 3 days earlier, Maverick had been standing in the same spot, staring at an empty paddock where his prize Arabian should have been. Storm Chaser wasn't just any horse. He was the culmination of 15 years of careful breeding, the descendant of champions, and the cornerstone of Maverick's empire that stretched across 3 states. The stallion's bloodline was so pure it read like royalty, and his speed on the track had earned Maverick more money than his oil wells ever had. Now Storm Chaser was gone, vanished without a trace from what was supposed to be the most secure ranch in Montana. Maverick had built his fortune from nothing, started with a single oil derrick. His grandfather left him and turned it into Hollowell Industries. But horses were his passion, his escape from boardrooms and quarterly reports. Storm Chaser represented everything he'd worked toward, the perfect fusion of his business acumen and his love for these magnificent creatures. The police had found nothing, no broken fences, no tire tracks, no signs of forced entry. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that night, showing only static during the crucial hours. It was as if Storm Chaser had simply dissolved into the Montana mist. Maverick's ranch hands, men who'd worked for him for decades, were devastated. Storm Chaser wasn't just their boss's prized possession. He was part of the family. The stallion had a personality as striking as his midnight coat, intelligent enough to open gate latches and gentle enough to nuzzle children who visited the ranch. The insurance company was already asking questions, their investigators poking around with barely concealed suspicion. A horse worth $2 million doesn't just disappear, they reminded Maverick with knowing looks. But he didn't care about their money, he wanted Storm Chaser back. Local news picked up the story, broadcasting Storm Chaser's photograph across the state. Maverick offered a $100,000 reward, no questions asked. The phone rang constantly with false leads and desperate attempts to claim the money. Each call was another knife twist of hope followed by crushing disappointment. The third night, Maverick couldn't sleep. He walked to Storm Chaser's empty stall, breathing in the lingering scent of hay and leather. The other horses sensed his distress, nickering softly from their stalls. Storm Chaser's absence was a wound in the heart of the ranch, disrupting the careful rhythm Maverick had spent years perfecting. He'd fired his security team, installed new cameras, and doubled the night watch, but it felt like closing the barn door after the horse had already escaped. The irony wasn't lost on him: all his money, all his power, and he couldn't protect the one thing that mattered most, standing in that empty stall. Maverick made a silent promise. He would find Storm Chaser, no matter what it took, no matter how long it required. The stallion wasn't just property to him. Storm Chaser was the embodiment of everything pure and powerful in a world that often felt corrupted by greed and compromise. Little did Maverick know that 60 miles away, a 12-year-old boy named Crispin Rothschild was making his own promise in the darkness, one that would change both their lives forever. Crispin Rothschild had always been small for his age, but tonight he felt smaller than ever as he crept through the abandoned mining tunnels beneath the Copper Ridge Mountains. The flashlight in his trembling hand cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, he could hear the soft snorting of a horse. He'd discovered Storm Chaser 3 days ago, not stolen by professional thieves as everyone assumed, but trapped in these forgotten mines after fleeing from something far worse. The stallion had broken free during a lightning storm, terrified and running blind into the night, only to fall through rotted boards covering an old mine entrance. Crispin knew these tunnels better than anyone. His father, Waylon Rothschild, had been a miner before the accident that left him wheelchair-bound and bitter. The boy had spent countless hours exploring the abandoned shafts, finding comfort in the silence away from his father's drinking and his mother's worried prayers. When he first heard the desperate whinnying echoing from below ground, Crispin thought it was his imagination. But following the sound led him to a natural cavern where Storm Chaser stood trapped, injured but alive, on a ledge 20 feet below the surface. The opening above was too narrow for the horse to escape, and the drop behind him fell into impenetrable darkness for 3 days. Crispin had been secretly caring for the stallion. He'd fashioned a rope from old mining cable, lowering buckets of water and hay he'd stolen from neighboring farms. The horse was injured, a deep gash on his flank from his fall, and a pronounced limp in his right front leg, but his eyes still held their fierce intelligence. Crispin's mother, Delilah, worked double shifts at the diner in town, trying to keep their family afloat while Waylon drank away his disability checks. She left before dawn and returned after midnight, exhausted and too worried about bills to notice her son's strange behavior. His father was lost in his own fog of pain and alcohol, barely acknowledging Crispin's existence. The boy had wanted to tell someone about Storm Chaser immediately, but fear paralyzed him. What if they thought he'd stolen the horse? His family couldn't afford lawyers or fines. The Rothschilds were already the subject of town gossip, the poor family, living in the shadow of tragedy, barely scraping by while the whole county knew about Waylon's accident and subsequent decline. But Storm Chaser was suffering, and Crispin couldn't bear it anymore. The horse had begun to trust him, even allowing the boy to examine his wounds. Crispin had cleaned the gash with water and torn strips from his own shirts, but he knew the injury needed proper medical attention. Late at night, when his parents were asleep, Crispin would descend into the tunnels and sit with Storm Chaser, talking to him in whispers about everything: school bullies, his father's anger, his mother's exhaustion, his own dreams of escape. The horse seemed to listen, his dark eyes reflecting understanding that Crispin had never found in the human world. On the third night, Storm Chaser's condition worsened. His breathing became labored, and he wouldn't eat the hay Crispin offered. The boy knew he was facing an impossible choice: let the horse die in secret, or risk everything to save him. That's when Crispin made his decision. He would get Storm Chaser out of the tunnel, even if it meant climbing down to the ledge himself. He spent hours rigging a pulley system from old mining equipment, testing ropes and anchors until he was confident they would hold. The rescue attempt was harrowing. Crispin rappelled down to the ledge, his small frame shaking with fear and determination. Storm Chaser was initially spooked by the boy's presence on his precarious perch, but Crispin's calm voice and gentle hands eventually soothed the frightened animal. Getting the horse up required every ounce of strength Crispin possessed and some engineering creativity that would have impressed his late grandfather, a mining foreman. Using pulleys and leverage, working through the night until his hands bled and his muscles screamed, the boy slowly hauled the magnificent stallion to safety. When Storm Chaser finally stood on solid ground outside the tunnel, both horse and boy were exhausted, injured, and bonded by their shared ordeal. But Crispin knew the hardest part was still ahead: returning the horse to his rightful owner and facing whatever consequences awaited. The sun was barely cresting the horizon when Crispin led Storm Chaser down the winding dirt road toward the Hollowell Ranch, his blood-stained shirt clinging to his thin frame and his heart hammering against his ribs. Every step felt like walking toward his own execution. But the stallion beside him moved with increasing confidence, as if sensing they were heading home. Maverick Hollowell was standing in his office doorway, coffee mug in hand, when he saw them approaching. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating, the stress and sleepless nights finally catching up with him. But there was no mistaking Storm Chaser's distinctive gait, even with the obvious limp, or the proud arch of his neck that had made him a champion. The boy leading the horse looked like he'd been through a war. His clothes were torn and dirty. Dried blood stained his shirt, and exhaustion was written in every line of his small frame. But his grip on the lead rope was steady, and his eyes held a determination that reminded Maverick of himself at that age. "That's my horse," Maverick said, his voice barely above a whisper as they approached. "Yes, sir," Crispin replied, stopping 20 feet away. "This is Storm Chaser. I brought him back." Maverick set down his coffee mug and walked slowly toward them, his eyes never leaving the stallion. Storm Chaser nickered softly, recognizing his owner. But the horse didn't pull away from the boy. There was something almost protective in the way the stallion positioned himself, as if shielding Crispin from potential threat. "Where has he been?" Maverick's voice was controlled, but Crispin could hear the underlying tension. "Where did you find him?" "He wasn't stolen," Mr. Hollowell, Crispin said quickly, the words tumbling out. He fell into the old Copper Ridge mines during that storm 3 nights ago. He was trapped on a ledge, injured. I've been taking care of him, bringing him food and water, but he needed to come home. Maverick knelt beside Storm Chaser, running his hands over the horse's legs and examining the bandage wound on his flank. The injury was clean and well tended, wrapped with what looked like strips of cotton shirt. Professional care couldn't have been better. You did this? Maverick asked, indicating the bandage. Crispin nodded. I clean it every day, change the dressing. He was bleeding pretty bad at first, but it's healing now. Maverick stood up slowly, studying the boy's face. There was no deception there, no guilt or shifty-eyed nervousness that would indicate theft, just exhaustion and a kind of fierce protectiveness that Maverick recognized because he felt it too. What's your name, son? Crispin Rothschild, sir. The name was familiar. Maverick remembered the mining accident from a few years back. Waylon Rothschild, crushed in a tunnel collapse, family struggling to survive. He donated to the fund that was set up, but like most wealthy men's charity, it had been impersonal, a check written and forgotten. How old are you? Crispin, 12, sir. Maverick felt something twist in his chest. This child, because that's what he was. Just a child, had spent 3 days caring for a $2 million horse in dangerous, abandoned mines, had rigged up some kind of rescue system to get a 1,000-pound animal out of a 20-foot hole, had walked miles in the early morning darkness to return him, expecting nothing in return. The $100,000 reward, Maverick said suddenly. It's yours. Crispin's eyes widened. Oh no, sir. I don't want any money. I just wanted Storm Chaser to be safe. He was hurting, and he needed to come home. The simplicity of the statement hit Maverick like a physical blow. Here was a child from a family that probably struggled to pay their electric bill, turning down a fortune because returning the horse was simply the right thing to do. Other ranch hands had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. They stood in a loose circle, marveling at Storm Chaser's return and the unlikely hero who'd brought him home. Maverick's foreman, Dusty Kellerman, was already on his phone calling the veterinarian. Storm Chaser trusts you, Maverick observed, watching how the stallion kept nudging Crispin's shoulder with his nose. That's not something he gives easily. We had some long talks in the dark, Crispin said, managing a small smile. I think he was as scared as I was. Maverick made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. Crispin, I want you to stay while the vet examines him. Storm Chaser is going to need someone he trusts during the treatment, and right now, I think that someone is you. The boy's face lit up with an expression of pure joy that was worth more than all of Maverick's oil wells combined. Dr. Evelyn Carruthers arrived within the hour, her veterinary truck kicking up dust as she pulled into the Hollowell ranch. She was a woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation treating everything from prize bulls to championship horses, but even she stopped short when she saw Storm Chaser standing calmly beside the small boy who'd rescued him. Well, I'll be, she murmured, setting down her medical bag. When I got the call that Storm Chaser was back, I figured I'd be dealing with a traumatized, half-wild animal. He looks remarkably calm. Crispin stood close to the stallion's head, one hand resting on Storm Chaser's neck. The horse occasionally nudged the boy's shoulder as if seeking reassurance, but his breathing was steady and his eyes were alert. The boy's been caring for him for 3 days, Maverick explained, in some abandoned mines up at Copper Ridge. Dr. Carruthers raised an eyebrow as she began her examination. Abandoned mines? How in the world did you get him out of there, son? Crispin ducked his head shyly. I used some old mining equipment, pulleys and ropes. My grandpa used to work the mines before he died, and my dad told me stories about how they moved heavy equipment. As Dr. Carruthers worked, checking Storm Chaser's vital signs and examining his injuries, she kept glancing at Crispin with growing amazement. The wound on the horse's flank was healing cleanly, with no signs of infection. The makeshift bandages had been changed regularly and applied with surprising skill. This is excellent field medicine, she told Maverick quietly. Whoever taught this boy knew what they were doing. Nobody taught me, Crispin said, overhearing. I I couldn't let him suffer. I read some books from the library about horse care, and I watched YouTube videos on my phone when I could get signal up in the mountains. The veterinarian's respect for the boy was evident in her expression. Storm Chaser's leg injury is healing. Well, but he'll need restricted movement for the next few weeks. The gash will leave a scar, but it won't affect his performance. Honestly, without this young man's care, we might have lost him to infection or worse. Maverick felt a strange tightness in his throat. He'd spent the past 3 days imagining the worst, torturing himself with thoughts of Storm Chaser suffering or dead. Meanwhile, this 12-year-old boy had been risking his own safety to provide round-the-clock care. Crispin. Maverick said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." The boy looked up, his young face serious. "How would you feel about helping Storm Chaser with his recovery? Coming here after school, maybe weekends, to work with him during his rehabilitation?" Crispin's eyes went wide. "You mean you'd trust me with him? Son, you've already proven yourself more trustworthy than anyone I know. Storm Chaser trusts you, and frankly, so do I." Dr. Carruthers smiled as she packed up her equipment. "I think that's an excellent idea. Storm Chaser is going to need gentle, consistent care over the next month. Someone who can spend time with him, help with his exercises, monitor his progress. Based on what I've seen today, I can't think of anyone better qualified." Crispin looked between Maverick and the veterinarian, then back at Storm Chaser, who was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Hollowell, but I should ask my parents first." "Of course," Maverick said. "In fact, why don't I drive you home and speak with them myself? I'd like to meet the people who raised such a remarkable young man." The drive to the Rothschild home was eye-opening for Maverick. He'd forgotten how the other side of the county lived the small, weathered houses, the yards full of old cars and broken dreams. But he also noticed things that spoke well of the family: the neat vegetable garden, the carefully mended fence, the pride evident even in poverty. When they pulled up to the modest trailer where Crispin lived, Maverick saw a woman in a diner uniform hurrying toward a beat-up sedan. She stopped when she saw the expensive truck in her driveway. "Mom," Crispin called, jumping out of the truck, "this is Mr. Hollowell. I found his horse." Delilah Rothschild was a woman who'd been beautiful once before worry and exhaustion etched lines around her eyes. She looked at Maverick with the wariness of someone who'd learned that wealthy people didn't usually bring good news to families like hers. But when Maverick explained what her son had done, how he'd saved Storm Chaser and refused the reward money, Delilah's expression changed to one of fierce maternal pride mixed with disbelief. "He's always been good with animals," she said softly. "Even as a little boy, hurt creatures would find their way to him." The conversation that followed would change all their lives. Waylon Rothschild sat in his wheelchair on the trailer's small porch, a beer in his hand despite the early hour, watching his wife talk to the millionaire who'd brought their son home. His face was a mask of suspicion and barely contained anger emotions that had become his default since the mining accident stole his livelihood and left him dependent on others. "What's this really about?" Waylon interrupted, his voice slurred but sharp. "Rich man doesn't drive clear out here just to say thank you. What do you want?" Maverick had dealt with bitter men before, understood the kind of rage that came from losing everything that defined you. He kept his voice respectful but direct. "I want to offer your son a job, Mr. Rothschild. Part-time, after school and weekends, helping with Storm Chaser's rehabilitation." "Charity," Waylon spat. "Don't need your pity money." "It's not charity," Maverick replied firmly. "Your son has a gift with horses that can't be taught. Storm Chaser trusts him in a way I've rarely seen. I'm offering him a position because he's earned it, not because I feel sorry for anyone." Delilah looked between her husband and Maverick, hope and fear warring in her expression. "What kind of job exactly?" "Horse rehabilitation specialist," Maverick said, the title forming as he spoke. "Storm Chaser will need months of careful recovery. Work, physical therapy, controlled exercise, constant monitoring. Crispin has already proven he can handle the responsibility." "How much?" The question came from Waylon, but his tone had lost some of its hostility. $50 a day," 6 days a week during recovery. If Crispin proves himself, and I believe he will, we can discuss a permanent position. With my breeding program, the number hung in the air. $50 a day was more than Delilah made. In tips at the diner, $300 a week would transform their family's financial situation. There's more. Maverick continued. I want to set up a college fund for Crispin. Full scholarship to any veterinary school he chooses when the time comes. Waylon's beer can trembled in his grip. Why? What's the catch? No catch. Your son saved my horse's life. More than that, he showed compassion and integrity that's rare at any age. I believe in investing in exceptional people. Crispin had been standing quietly beside Storm Chaser. Maverick had brought the horse along, knowing the boy would want to see him again. Now he spoke up, his voice small but determined. Dad, I want to do this. Storm Chaser needs me, and I like being useful. The words hit Waylon like a physical blow. When had his 12-year-old son started feeling like he needed to be useful? When had this family's circumstances made a child feel responsible for fixing their problems? Delilah knelt beside her husband's wheelchair, taking his hand. Waylon, this could change everything for us, for Crispin. Waylon looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in months. The boy had grown taller, his face had lost some of its childish roundness, and his eyes held a maturity that shouldn't have been there at 12. When had that happened? When had Waylon been so lost in his own pain that he'd missed his son growing up? You really want this, boy? Waylon asked. Crispin nodded eagerly. Storm Chaser and we understand each other. I think I can help him get better. Waylon was quiet for a long moment, staring at the magnificent horse that his son had somehow rescued from certain death. Finally, he looked up at Maverick. He's just a kid. If this is some kind of game to you, if you're gonna use him and throw him away when you get bored, Mr. Rothschild. Maverick interrupted gently. I don't have children of my own, but if I did, I'd hope they'd grow up to be half as courageous and compassionate as your son. This isn't a game to me. This is about recognizing something special and nurturing it. Delilah squeezed her husband's hand. It's Crispin's choice, Waylon. The boy looked at his father with eyes that held hope and determination in equal measure. I want to do this, Dad. I want to help Storm Chaser, and I want to help our family. Waylon nodded slowly, his throat too tight for words. For the first time since the accident, he felt something other than despair. He felt proud of the man his son was becoming. All right then, he managed. But I have conditions. Maverick raised an eyebrow. The boy finishes his education first, always. No missing school for horse work. And if he ever wants to quit, that's his choice, no questions asked. Agreed. Maverick said immediately, those are exactly the conditions I would have suggested. As they shook hands, Crispin beamed with joy, and Storm Chaser nudged the boy's shoulder as if in approval. Looking at them together, Maverick realized he wasn't just gaining an employee, he was gaining something far more valuable. He was gaining a family. 6 months later, the Hollowell Ranch had become a different place entirely. Storm Chaser had made a complete recovery, his gait strong and his spirit fiercer than ever. But the real transformation was in the people around him. Crispin arrived every day after school on a new bicycle Maverick had bought him, his backpack heavy with homework that he'd complete in Storm Chaser's stall while the horse rested. The boy had grown 3 inches and gained 20 pounds of muscle from the physical work. But more importantly, he'd found his calling. Under Dr. Carruthers' guidance, Crispin had become an expert in equine rehabilitation. He understood Storm Chaser's moods, knew exactly how much exercise to push for, and could spot the slightest change in the horse's condition. Other ranch hands, men with decades of experience, now came to the 12-year-old for advice about their horses. That boy has more natural horsemanship than anyone I've ever seen, Dusty Kellerman told Maverick one evening as they watched Crispin lead Storm Chaser through a complex series of exercises. Horse Whisperer doesn't even cover it. It's like they share the same mind. Maverick nodded, pride swelling in his chest. He'd started thinking of Crispin as the son he'd never had, and the feeling seemed to be mutual. The boy had begun calling him Mr. Mauve instead of the formal Mr. Hollowell, and their relationship had evolved from employer-employee to something much deeper. The changes extended beyond the ranch. Delilah Rothschild had been able to quit her second job at the diner, using the extra time to take online courses toward a nursing degree. The financial pressure that had been slowly crushing their family had lifted, replaced by hope and possibility. But the most dramatic transformation was in Waylon. Maverick had quietly arranged for him to consult on mine safety protocols for Hollowell Industries extraction operations. It wasn't charity. Waylon's expertise was genuinely valuable, but it gave the man back his sense of purpose and professional pride. "You know what you did, don't you?" Dr. Carruthers asked Maverick one day as they watched Crispin work with a new horse that had been brought in for rehabilitation. "You didn't just save that family financially, you gave them back their dignity." Maverick had been thinking the same thing. The Rothschilds had never asked for handouts, never expected anything beyond fair payment for fair work. They'd maintained their pride while accepting help, and that balance had made all the difference. "Storm Chaser saved them," Maverick corrected. "I just happened to own him." The veterinarian smiled. "I think it was the other way around. That boy saved Storm Chaser, and Storm Chaser saved all of you." As if summoned by their conversation, Crispin approached with Storm Chaser walking calmly beside him. The stallion's coat gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and his eyes held the same intelligent fire that had made him a champion. But now there was also contentment. "Mr. Mauve," Crispin said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, son?" "Storm Chaser is ready to return to competition if you want. His leg is completely healed, and he's faster than ever." "But," the boy paused, stroking the horse's neck, "I think he's happier here, working with the other horses, being part of the rehabilitation program. What if instead of racing, he became a teacher?" Maverick considered this. Storm Chaser was worth millions as a racing stallion, but the horse did seem to have found a new purpose. He'd naturally taken to helping train younger horses, demonstrating gaits and behaviors with the patience of a born instructor. "You think he'd rather be a mentor than a racer?" "I think he'd rather be useful than famous," Crispin said simply. The wisdom in those words struck Maverick profoundly. Here was a 12-year-old boy who understood something that had taken Maverick decades to learn: that purpose mattered more than glory, that being needed was more valuable than being celebrated. "Then that's what he'll be," Maverick decided. Storm Chaser, head of equine education at the Hollowell Ranch Rehabilitation Center. Crispin's face lit up with joy, and Storm Chaser whinnied softly as if in agreement. As they walked back toward the barn together, man, boy, and horse, Maverick reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when Crispin had appeared with blood on his shirt and Storm Chaser at his side. He'd gained a horse back, but more than that, he'd gained a family and a purpose that money could never buy. The Hollowell Ranch Rehabilitation Center would become legendary in the horse world, known not just for healing injured animals but for the extraordinary bond between a millionaire cowboy, a boy with a gift for understanding horses, and a stallion who chose teaching over winning. But that's getting ahead of the story. Right now, it was enough to watch Storm Chaser nuzzle Crispin's hair while the boy laughed with pure, uncomplicated joy, the sound echoing across the Montana plains like a promise of better days to come. 5 years later, Crispin Rothschild stood at the entrance to the Hollowell Ranch Rehabilitation Center, watching a convoy of horse trailers arrive from 3 different states. At 17, he'd grown tall and lean, his hands strong and sure from years of working with animals, his eyes holding the calm confidence that came from finding his life's calling early. Storm Chaser, now 10 years old and in his prime, stood beside him like a co-host welcoming guests. The stallion had become the heart of the rehabilitation center, his gentle wisdom helping dozens of injured horses find their way back to health and purpose. "Nervous?" Maverick asked, joining them at the gate. At 55, he looked younger than he had 5 years ago, the lines of worry replaced by laugh lines earned through countless hours. Watching Crispin work miracles with damaged animals, a little, Crispin admitted. "This is the biggest group we've ever taken on." The convoy represented horses from across the western states, race horses with career-ending injuries, ranch horses traumatized by accidents, and several rescue animals seized from neglect situations. Each trailer held a story of pain and loss, but also the potential for healing and hope. The Hollowell Ranch Rehabilitation Center had grown from a single horse's recovery into a renowned facility that combined cutting-edge veterinary science with Crispin's intuitive understanding of equine psychology. Universities sent their veterinary students here for internships, and the waiting list for placement stretched months into the future. "Remember what Storm Chaser taught us," Maverick said, placing a hand on Crispin's shoulder. "Every horse has a story, and every story can have a better ending." Crispin nodded, watching as the first trailer backed up to the unloading ramp. Inside, he could hear the nervous whinnying of a thoroughbred that had shattered his leg in a racing accident. The horse's career was over, but his life was just beginning a new chapter. The unloading process was carefully orchestrated. Each horse was evaluated by Dr. Carruthers, now the center's head veterinarian, then assigned to one of the specialized rehabilitation programs Crispin had developed. Some horses needed physical therapy, others required psychological healing from trauma, and a few just needed time and patience to remember that humans could be trusted. As Crispin worked with the new rivals, Storm Chaser moved among them like an ambassador of hope. The older stallion had an uncanny ability to calm frightened animals, his presence communicating safety and understanding in ways that transcended species barriers. "Look at that," Delilah Rothschild said to her husband as they watched their son work. Both parents had become integral parts of the center's operation. Delilah as the office manager, after completing her nursing degree, and Waylon as the head of safety and equipment maintenance. "Hard to believe that scared little boy who brought Storm Chaser home became this," Waylon replied, his voice thick with pride. The accident that had once defined his life now felt like a distant chapter, replaced by the daily satisfaction of meaningful work and a son who'd exceeded every dream he'd dared to have. By evening, all the new horses were settled in their stalls, each one paired with a companion animal that could provide emotional support. During the adjustment period, Storm Chaser had personally visited each stall, his calm presence helping the traumatized animals begin to relax. At dinner in the ranch house kitchen, a tradition that had evolved over the years to include the extended family the center had created, Maverick raised his glass of sweet tea. "To second chances," he said, looking around the table at faces that represented his greatest fortune, "and to the boy who reminded us all that the most valuable things in life can't be measured in dollars." Crispin blushed at the attention, but Storm Chaser, lying on a specially designed bed beside the table, lifted his great head and whinnied softly, as if adding his own toast to the sentiment. Later that night, Crispin and Maverick walked through the barn for their evening check on the horses. It was a ritual they'd maintained for 5 years, a quiet time when they could talk about the day's progress and plan for tomorrow's challenges. "I got a call from Colorado State University today," Maverick said as they paused at Storm Chaser's stall. "They want to offer you a full scholarship to their veterinary program, with a specialty track in equine rehabilitation that they're designing specifically around the techniques you've developed here." Crispin stroked Storm Chaser's nose, considering this. "What about the center? What about all the horses that need help? The center will be here when you get back," Maverick assured him. "Dr. Carruthers can handle the medical side, and Storm Chaser can manage the horse psychology department. But Crispin, you have a gift that could help thousands of horses if you get the formal training to back up your natural abilities." The boy, now nearly a man, nodded slowly. "Storm Chaser would be okay without me," as if understanding the question. The stallion nudged Crispin's shoulder and then looked pointedly at Maverick, as if to say that he'd be in good hands. "He'll miss you," Maverick said. "We all will. But this isn't goodbye, it's growth. And when you come back with your veterinary degree, we'll build something even bigger and better. Maybe a teaching hospital where other young people can learn what you've learned." Crispin smiled, seeing the future spread out before him like the Montana plains, vast, full of possibility, and bright with promise.